Okay, welcome back to another discussion about the PTU handbook. I know it's been a while since I've made another video of this, but here we are with another video. So today I'm planning to touch on the skills. And so what we can start off with is that skills are what characters and Pokemons use to, when they're facing something difficult, then they would use a skill check to see if they know this stuff or they know how to do this or that. And it really depends on the dice roll too. Normally, if you roll high, then your game master would tell you that, okay, you were able to do this. And then if you roll low, then that means you just failed a roll and you weren't able to achieve something you were trying to do. So on this page, it shows that the skills rank from 1 to 6, 1 being the lowest and 6 being the highest. And they all have names next to them. 1 being pathetic, 2 untrained, 3 novice, 4 adept, 5 expert, and 6 master. And then there's a corresponding dice roll to them too. And so let's just start with the first skill, which is acrobatics. So acrobatics is used when, you're trying to jump down from somewhere high, maybe a cliff or a tree, and your GM asks you to make an acrobatics check to make sure that you cushion your fall or you injure yourself really badly from the fall. And it could also be used for when you're trekking through certain terrains that are difficult, like in a swampy area, or where there's like a bunch, when you're walking in the desert, for instance. So that's pretty much it. And there's some, as you can see, there's some edges that you can take that requires a certain rank for your acrobatics. And so the next one is athletics, which is pretty similar to acrobatics. I feel like they should have just been in one skill. But anyways, athletics is to determine basically your stamina. And it's similar to acrobatics, meaning that for certain cases, like you're trying to climb a tree or do a marathon, for instance, or just traveling for a long time, your GM would ask you to roll for an athletics check to see how fit your character is. Basically, characters with a very high athletics rank would have the advantage, and of course the ones with a low rank would have a disadvantage. And then the next one is combat. So combat, in my campaign, I don't really utilize that one that much because the players rely on their Pokemons more, but Pokemons they have a combat skill that they can use. They don't necessarily need to use their moves in certain situations. Say like you don't really want to injure an opponent, rather you want to push them away from something, and so you can use the combat skill to do that. And in some cases, if the player themselves want to engage in a battle, they can use combat checks too. And they're usually used when you're stuck in a sticky situation, such as you got caught somewhere, or someone's getting a hold of you and you can't break free from them. You can do opposing combat checks to see which one wins, and then you could be out of their grasp. And then also combat is mostly used for if a player holds a weapon, so that's what they usually rely on. And then next we move on to Intimidate. Intimidate is for characters that like to scare other people, whether it be people and Pokemon. Like for instance, if someone's trying to pickpocket you and if you have a high enough intimidation skill rank, then you can scare them off and they would fail at pickpocketing you. And then this skill is mostly used for, let's say, the antagonist and their grunts. And then there's a bunch of wild Pokemons that the Game Master can choose to make them be more intimidating to players. And then for stealth is pretty much self-explanatory. Think of it as the sleight of hand in the 5e edition. So stealth is just more like sneaking around someone if you're trying to get through security or you're trying to pickpocket someone. Then you would roll for a stealth check. And for an opposing check, the other person would just roll for perception to identify the person that's sneaking by. Then we have survival. Survival is used when you're going to different terrains, not just like the usual flat land type of terrain. Say like you're trekking through a rainforest or a mountain that has a snowstorm, and so people that have a high survival skill rank would be able to get by those terrains easily. And then it's not just trekking through terrains, the skill is also useful for identifying your surroundings, such as what Pokemons are in the area, or it gives you an idea of what type of Pokemons will live in this habitat. And it can also help you scavenge for food, like mushrooms or types of flowers. And let's see, you can also identify some fossils or just types of rocks. You can identify like if this stone is an evolutionary stone or is it a fossil, for instance. Then we have the first education skill. I think there's a total of 5 types of education skills. The first one being general education. General education is just basically your basic knowledge of stuff, whether it be like history, literature, philosophy, you name it. And someone with a high general education would be able to determine certain stuff better. And then you can also determine the history of a certain place, like a city or town, what has happened, based off some clues that are given either by NPCs or just just your surroundings. Now we move on to medicine education. Medicine education is really useful in case you're somewhere far away from a town or city and you or an ally happen to be injured or sick. With a high medicine education, you're able to determine, okay, what type of plant or berry you can go find to treat this wound or this illness. And you can also learn how to craft certain healing items like a splint or make some bandages. It's really helpful, again, for if you're nowhere near a Pokemon Center or a Pokemart, then you could take care of yourself and your allies. Then we have occult education. Occult education isn't used a lot in my campaign, only because there's not a lot of players. Well, I would say 3 of the players don't really have supernatural powers. And so occult educations are usually for trainers that uses a lot of ghost type Pokemon, and they can decipher ruins. Like if they were to go to a ruin full of unknowns, then they would be able to research about that. And basically they have an ability to communicate with ghost types better, and they have mysterious powers that are not realistic to if there was just a regular human. Now we have Pokemon education. These are like the knowledge of what Pokemon you would see in the wild. If you see something similar to that, your character can roll a Pokemon education check. And what I like to do is that if they roll a high enough number, then I would tell them, okay, you're familiar with this Pokemon and you know that this Pokemon is called whatever name it is. And then for low rolls, I like to say that, you know, you've seen that Pokemon before from books or someone mentioning it to you, but you don't really remember what species it is, the behavior or the typing it is. And then last but not least, we have technology education. This skill is for people that like to work with electronics. Now, it's different from the other education skills because, you know, it's focusing more on electronics, so you can use a computer better, you can hack or fix electronics or even make your own. And so this skill is really good if you're going to an enemy's base and you're trying to hack into their system to figure out more information. Then we have Guile. Now, the first time I read about Guile, I thought it was similar to the Charisma skill in the 5e edition, but this one is different from it in terms of this skill is used for when you're trying to lie or cover up something. Like, for instance, you're trying to get through this building that's guarded by a security guard, and, you know, maybe you're trying to lie something about them, or, well, let's say this is a better idea. Say that you committed a crime and an officer is accusing you for committing this type of crime, and then you would roll a Guile check to see if your lying is strong enough to make them believe that you didn't actually do it. It was actually someone else. And you can also like pretend to be someone else too. Like if you happen to find a grunt's clothing, then you could wear it, and you could even pretend to be one of the grunts in the enemy's base. And to do opposing checks for guile, you would normally roll for intuition to decide whether the person is lying or not, and then if you're trying to see through the person's disguise, you would use a perception check. And speaking of perception, this is the next skill. And in addition to this skill, for my campaign, I let my players use this skill to see if there's any hidden items or maybe Pokemons in the area. And this is, just basically to help you figure out certain stuff that are around you, or maybe you're trying to see something far away. And then again, you can use this skill to make opposing checks for people that use stealth checks. And then we have charm. Now the charm skill is pretty much the charisma skill. You can persuade someone to let you do something. For instance, if you're trying to get into a building and it's guarded by someone, you can talk your way through, and hopefully they'll let you through depending on your skill check. The higher the better. And you can also build your reputation at like cities or towns. Maybe the way that your character talks to NPCs, they actually like them. Then we have command. Command is mostly used during Pokemon battles. Say that because you're always commanding a Pokemon to use a move. But it could be used for when there's a hostile Pokemon and they don't listen to you. You would have to make a command check to see whether you successfully ordered them to do whatever in battle. Now for outside of battle, command skills could be used for if a city or town is under attack and everyone's panicking. So you're basically using your command skill as like a leader. You can tell everyone to calm down and help them evacuate depending on the situation. And then we have focus. Focus is when you're trying to concentrate on something, whether it's like learning something through a book, or you're lockpicking something, or you're trying to communicate with a Pokemon. And that's pretty much self-explanatory for that. Then last skill we have is intuition. Intuitions are usually used for when characters have a detective like personality. They like to find clues and solve problems, and they use a lot of hints and clues, anything that's around them, to figure out something. And they can use that intuition skill to interpret a person's body language or any hints that they're giving or how the person may feel, and tell if they're lying or telling the truth. And the opposing check for this is guile. And then that's all the skills that is in the handbook. So next time I'm hoping to cover the classes. I'm planning to read more into it and understand each of the features of it. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any ideas of what you would like me to cover or just talk about more, just leave it in the comments. Alright, until then, bye.